Hello. In this video, I'm going to be proposing a new scientific hypothesis that's an extension of an existing and an established geological phenomena. We're looking at the Mediterranean Sea from an altitude of around 3,000 miles. If one didn't know the true history of the Mediterranean Sea, one could easily be forgiven for thinking that the sea had always existed. For it's a body of water that encompasses an area of around 2.5 million square kilometers and a volume of around 4 million cubic kilometers. But it turned out that in the 1970s, indisputable evidence was discovered that the sea had at one point been a dry basin, and that it had formed around 5.33 million years ago in a massive flood known as the Zanclean Flood, in which the Atlantic Ocean penetrated the Strait of Gibraltar and broke through and then carved a deep canyon, and into this basin flowed a massive amount of water, and that the sea essentially had been reformed in this flood in a period of only around 2 months to a year. And we also know that the Black Sea, in fact, was also isolated from the larger ocean in the Mediterranean Sea, and used to be a freshwater lake as recently as around 8,000 years ago, when at one point the Mediterranean Sea broke in through the Bosphorus Strait and then flooded that freshwater lake and then transformed it into the sea as it exists today. The question that I wish to ask is, has this phenomena occurred in only these two seas in which that phenomena has been verified to have occurred? Or is this a general geological phenomena that takes place in every single sea that exists across the world? That is, could the Red Sea have dried up and then have been reformed by a massive flood? Could the South China Sea have actually been a dry basin and reformed in a flood? Could the Sea of Japan have underwent the same phenomenon in which the Japanese archipelago was a continuous landmass that completely encircled the Sea of Japan at one point, causing it to dry up, and then ultimately become reflooded, reforming the sea as it exists today? Could that same phenomena have also occurred in the Caribbean Sea and in the Gulf of Mexico, and even in the Arctic Ocean, which some oceanographers have considered to be a sea of the larger Atlantic Ocean instead of an ocean in its own right? Now, this theory, or this, I should say, hypothesis, because it's not really, there's not enough really evidence to call it a theory as of yet, but this hypothesis is absolutely central to my view of Atlantis. And I will be discussing the connection between Atlantis and this concept of seas drying up and then ultimately become reforming in a massive flood, and how that relates to my theory of Atlantis. But in this video, I just wanted to introduce this theory of this phenomena that occurred in the Mediterranean Sea in which it dried up and then reformed, not just being localized to the Mediterranean and the Black Seas, but it being a general geological phenomena that occurs everywhere across the world, in every single sea, including the Red Sea, the South China Sea, the Arctic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean. And moreover, not just that this happens, because if it happened, that would be very interesting in and of itself. But I will argue in future videos that this is the single most important geological process that occurs on the surface of the Earth, with the possible exception of asteroid impacts. But asteroid impacts, we know, have decreased in their frequency from the early history of the Earth. Between around 4.5 billion years to 4 billion years ago, the Earth was impacted by multiple asteroids and comets that were hundreds of kilometers across. But after that period called the Late Heavy Bombardment, the frequency of asteroid and the severity of asteroid impacts decreased significantly. And I'm arguing that ever since that time, this phenomena of seas disappearing and then reforming in massive floods has been the single most important geological phenomena shaping the Earth and its history and its ultimate destiny, not just by a few percent, but by far. And that it just completely exceeds the geological significance of volcanoes, earthquakes, and all other phenomena. And I'll be discussing this more in future videos.